Good morning. We are delighted that you are again here with us this morning, whether you're in person or joining us virtually. We're glad to see you for our second session of our 4-week series on what comes next for the United Methodist Church. This morning, we'll specifically be discussing the major legislation that we expect to be considered at the next General Conference, whenever that General Conference will take place, as well as the primary groups and stakeholders involved in the debate around human sexuality in United Methodist Church and some of the ways that they connect to that legislation that will be considered. I'm sad to report this morning that Garlinda Burton, our keynote speaker, came down with COVID last week. Fortunately, she's doing all right, all things considered. Having said that, she will not be here with us in person this morning. However, Garlinda has very graciously offered to lead us from her home via Zoom today. So our session will continue as planned this morning. Garlinda will just be on the screen rather than here at the podium this morning. Garlinda, thank you for your commitment to being here with us and leading us through this conversation. COVID is not even stopping you, so we're all very impressed. We owe you a debt of gratitude. There will be an extra jewel in your crown in heaven, know that. So thank you very much. A few pieces of housekeeping before I turn it over to Garlinda. Our internet is a little bit overtaxed this morning, I'm told, just given all the things that we're doing online, all of our participants zooming in and our leader zooming in, along with the other churches in the area also doing online things, as we all are these days. So there may be times during Garlinda's presentation that there is a lag or a delay. Know that that is out of our control, and just please be patient with us. Just a reminder that you can submit your questions written on the cards that we've placed in your seats along with the pens. You can write any question at any time. If you would, after you write it, raise it in the air and one of our tellers will come by and pick it up. Ann Walkup and Camille Maley, they'll collect questions. Just make sure to raise it in the air after you write it, and they'll take it up. And I would encourage you to go ahead and write out your questions sooner rather than later. Don't wait until the end for 10 minutes. Go ahead and pick those up and have those in the queue so that when it comes time for asking questions, that those are ready to go. Just a reminder that the next 2 Sundays, the final 2 Sundays, we'll have more of a sustained time for question and answer. And if you're online and you have a question, you can submit your question in the chat, and one of our tech people will write that down on a card and make sure that that question gets submitted along with everyone else's in writing. And remember also that your question may be held later. It may be held for a more relevant session, or we may plan to cover it in a part of our presentation. So know that we're receiving all of your questions, but do be patient with us. We want to try to cover it at the best time. We'll try to cover as many questions as we possibly can during our series. And at the end of our session today, it would be very helpful if you could, on your way out, pick up the cards, the blank cards that haven't been used and their pens, and drop them in the back on your way out. There's a couple of boxes there that would help us clean up. I'll also remind you that our sessions are being recorded for anyone who misses a session, or if you want to rewatch a session. These recordings will be available on Calvary's YouTube page, on our Facebook page, and they'll also go out in the email version of From Our Hill. So be on the lookout for these recordings. Lastly, I do want to say a special thank you to all of the staff and the volunteers who have made this series possible, especially David Lowe, who is responsible for tearing down and setting up this stage each and every week. We have other stuff going on in here, so we can't just leave this up. So he's doing this multiple times. And of course, special thank you to Andy Morris, Dave Nichols, and Olivia Keffer, our technology wizards who make all of the technology and the recordings and the pivoting with Garlinda possible. So if you would, please join me in showing our appreciation for these staff and volunteers. Thank you. Garlinda, we are thrilled to have you back, even though you are joining us virtually. It feels a little weird that I'm looking at these cameras and speaking to you rather than seeing you face to face. We're thrilled to have you back. I'm going to turn it over to you. And just a reminder that we will transition to a 10-minute period of question and answer at 10:05. Thank you again for being here today.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Eric. Can you all still hear me okay? Okay, good. I see nods. I have been in isolation for 2 years without having to deal with COVID, but my granddaughter, as some of you met last week, is a college student, and she comes back and forth. So we think that's kind of how we got it. She also has COVID, and she's isolated on campus. So, but we're feeling good and appreciate your concern. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to move through pretty rapidly just to get our points on the table, and will give us time for some questions. So I'm going to share my, I need to be allowed to share if that's possible. If not, I don't have to use the PowerPoint. So can someone help me with that? It says I'm disabled from sharing. Okay, don't even stress about it. We're good.
You should be good
Here
now.
we go. There we go. All righty. Let's see. Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna share. Yeah, I'm gonna start it right here. So we're having our continuing conversation on the status and role of LGBTQ persons in the church life and work. To remind us from last week, the status and role of homosexual persons has been a major topic of debate and denominational lawmaking since 1972. You'll remember Tom McAnally took us through that timeline. Our current church law prohibits the ordination of self-avowed practicing homosexuals as clergy and bans performance of same-gender weddings. And that prohibition was strengthened in 2019. We're going to talk more about what happened in 2019. And annual conferences, in our case, our conference is the Tennessee Western Kentucky Conference. The annual conferences make the final decisions about who gets ordained or licensed as clergy according to the discipline. Some conferences have a don't ask, don't tell policy, so they don't even ask a question about sexual orientation. Other conferences require clergy or candidates to answer direct questions. This is our church law currently. This is our statement. It affirms that all people are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God. I believe the full language is homosexuals, no less than heterosexuals, have sacred worth and are beloved by God. And it says the United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching, affirming that God's grace is available to all. And I think that's important for us to remember, that we're not just talking about an issue, we're talking about human beings. And so, as we struggle as a church, it's helpful to remember that we're talking about children of God, as we all are. Reminder is General Conference is the only entity that can set church law or change church law. Oh, shoot, what did I do? That can speak on behalf of the whole church. And that General Conference, which meets normally every 4 years, comprises delegates from every annual conference from around the world. So the debate over homosexuality has, let me see if I can get in here. It has dominated the legislative process at every general conference since 72. And after another gridlock at 2016 General Conference, that means that it's hard to get through the rest of the business at General Conference because so much of the business has become the conversation about how the church will accept or not accept people who are LGBTQ. So after a particularly contentious session in 2016, a special session of General Conference was held in 2019. So normally we meet every 4 years. So 2016 was 1 year. The next one should have been 2020. But in 2019, the church called a special General Conference just to deal with the conversation about homosexuality and the status and role of homosexuality, of homosexuals in the life of the church. It was supposed to settle the matter for good. It did not. So in an attempt to keep the church from breaking apart, this is what 2019 was supposed to do. In an attempt to keep our church from breaking apart, we brought the church had to consider 3 broad proposals at the 2019 special session of General Conference. And these 3 broad proposals also represent the 3 broad groups that have emerged, as Eric pointed out, these groups who have emerged with ideas about how we move forward as a church or several churches. So 2019 was really a watershed. So the first plan that was proposed at General Conference, I don't know if it was the first, but I think it was, it might have been, was called the One Church Plan. And this was an attempt to still keep all United Methodists under one big tent. So an attempt to keep our church together by allowing different groups of the church to go to do certain things. So it proposed moving the prohibitions about ordination and same-gender marriage, but it would allow any annual conference or bishops or areas to either ordain gay or lesbian clergy, or would allow people to opt out of that based on their own context. And this was particularly, the conversation was particular around Africa and parts of Europe, Eastern Europe particularly, but Europe, where they are less inclined to view homosexuality in a positive way. And so it was to allow these conferences to set their own context based on their cultural understanding, while allowing other areas, the United States, for example, maybe with a more permissive point of view, to set their own policies. It was, as I said, it was offered as a way to respect those central conferences. And that's what we call, they're adjacent to jurisdictional conferences outside the United States. So it was a way to respect those central conferences and US conservative conferences and congregation, while allowing others freedom from the bans that are there. And it was rejected by the 2019 delegates. So that was the One Church Plan. And One Church Plan, keep us in one church. So then the second proposal, let's see, was the Simple Plan. And these are all pictures from General Conference. This is, if you'll look, this is a legislative session. So this is a legislative committee having a conversation about an issue at General Conference. If you've never been to General Conference, it's fascinating. It operates like a big legislative assembly. There are legislative committees, and then we come back to a large assembly. The legislative committees are assigned particular topics to deal with and bring recommendations. Any local church and any person in the United Methodist Church can submit legislation to General Conference. If you're a United Methodist in good standing, you can actually submit legislation to General Conference. So anyway, that was my aside. The Simple Plan that was proposed was just removing the language, removing the prohibitive language, and admitting that the church is not in agreement, but will continue to seek God's guidance. So it would have taken the incompatibility language out, the bans out, just take that restrictive language out of the discipline. And as I said before, just say that we're not of one mind and continue to seek God's guidance. Okay, delegates rejected this plan as well. So the 2019 delegates did adopt what was called and is still being called the traditional plan. And this traditional plan upheld and strengthened the existing laws that ban ordination of LGBTQ persons and performing same gender marriages. And it made, sorry, there's a typo. Oh, what did I do? There's a typo there. It made the punishments for those who violated church law much more strident. So currently in our law book, it is a chargeable offense to ordain someone who is LGBTQ or perform a wedding. It can be a chargeable offense, and someone can be brought up on church charges, but they don't have to be. Well, the traditional plan made it more strident and more punitive. And it is the current law of the church right now, because this is the plan that folks adopted. The traditional plan passed by a slim majority vote of 438 to 384, with almost all delegates from across Africa supporting this plan. So even though the rest of the world was also struggling with it, the plan would not have passed without the support of our African brothers and sisters. In most parts of Africa, homosexuality is still looked upon as sinful. And so the conservative folks in the United States and other parts of the world really worked with folks in Africa to get them to rally, and they rallied. It wasn't that they had to be bullied into it. This is a very strongly felt in many parts of Africa. And so then it also gained the backing of several conservative groups in the UMC. As I said, most African church and several European church leaders. But it didn't settle the debate. So it was passed, but it did not settle the debate. Rather, it sparked resistance immediately and caused more serious talks about the denominational split. So here we are. What are United Methodists on all sides of the issue considering for 2022 and beyond? Remember, we were supposed to have General Conference in Minneapolis in 2020. That was our regularly scheduled General Conference. Because of COVID, it got pushed back to 2021, and it's been pushed back again to August 2022 because of the global pandemic. It's still scheduled to be in Minneapolis, but we're not sure. We're waiting to hear from the Commission on General Conference about whether or not we're even going to be able to have it. What's happening? So the Wesley Covenant Association, which is a conglomerate of conservative United Methodists, mostly in the United States, but not all, has now made plans to leave and organize, have already developed the blueprint for what they're wanting to call the Global Methodist Church. And so several U.S. congregations and annual conferences have already or say they will separate from the United Methodist Church and join this new denomination. Now, remember, the traditional plan won the day in 2019, but there was still resistance to it. People have continued to fight that. Some annual conferences and even one jurisdiction, the North Central jurisdiction, has said that it will not comply with church law, with the prohibitions, and they have developed a covenant of welcome for gay and lesbian persons in the whole north central region of our United Methodist Church, and that has passed. It's being tested now in church courts, but they've said that. But the Wesley Covenant Association says, look, we're tired of fighting. We believe that our folks are clear that they do not believe that homosexuality should be condoned by the church. And so they've decided that they're going to leave and organize their own church. This is the proposal that they're going to bring. And some progressive United Methodists, on the other hand, formed the Liberation Methodist Connection, and that is the correct spelling, in 2020, and say that in their departure from the mainstream church, they're also talking about starting a new, much more progressive church that will make central to their Christian mission welcoming people of color and LGBTQ persons, and helping their church to become free of the sin of racism and being a more welcoming place for all people. So that's the more progressive wing. So you have the more conservative wing, Global Methodist Church, the Liberating Methodists, or the Liberation Methodist Connection. And they say in their departure from the church what they will do. And then you have a group that has been in conversation called Uniting Methodist. And this would be considered a more big tent group. This is the group that has been in conversations about how to create or recreate the United Methodist Church with church members who want to remain in the United Methodist Church, who consider themselves moderate to progressive, yet who still believe that God still has mission and ministry for the United Methodist Church to do. So these would be more of the centrists. So those three groups at least will be coming to General Conference with some ideas. The delay of General Conference is causing a little anxiety among congregations who want to leave the church now, but some are doing it. We have about 37,000 churches in the United States total. United Methodist congregations, 37,000. And I think about 300 have talked about leaving or are trying to leave right now. Some folks were trying to wait until General Conference 2020 considered and passed what's called reconciliation and grace through separation. But because General Conference has been postponed, they haven't been able to move forward. And this what's called this protocol is supposed to lay out how churches may leave with their property and their assets, and how pastors will be handled if they leave the current United Methodist Church for a new church. And the reason this is important, and I'm sure you all will talk about this later, is the issue is how we divide and distribute church money and property, because we have in the United Methodist Church, or historically have had what's called a trust clause, meaning that a church building, church property is held in trust by a congregation for the whole church. And so once a church is no longer wanting to be United Methodist, it's not just, well, we'll take our building and we'll take our money and we go, because the covenant that we have is that our churches are held in trust for the whole denomination. And so if we decide we don't want to be United Methodist anymore, arguably all of those resources could come back to the denomination, to the conference, and be redistributed. However, this protocol and some of the conversation going on now as churches are attempting to disaffiliate is trying to make sense of the church clause, and also, as the title says, to allow people to leave graciously with the things that they need to flourish. And that's pretty much the PowerPoint presentation. I did want to say that in addition to annual conferences and congregations that are thinking about leaving on both sides, there have already been some groups that have disaffiliated with the United Methodist Church on both sides of the aisle. I can't remember, I was trying to find the name of the college, but one of our United Methodist related colleges actually voted to leave the United Methodist Church family. And we have over 100 colleges in the United States that are related to the United Methodist Church. Some Duke, Southern Methodist University, Martin Methodist. Some you may not be aware of. Emory University is a United Methodist related school, but one of our United Methodist related schools decided to leave because they did not want to be a part of a church that banned homosexuality, that vilified, in their words, people who were gay and lesbian. And so they pulled out of the church because of ideology. So it's not just people on the conservative side. We have people on other sides. We also have a couple of congregations that are considering leaving because they believe that the church is not being humble in this conversation. And some of you might be familiar with Adam Hamilton, and he's a mega church pastor in the United Methodist Church, and Mike Slaughter. A few years ago, they tried to bring legislation to General Conference that said, look, let's just admit that we are not of one mind about the topic of how homosexual persons should be engaged and treated in our church. Let's be confessional and say that we who are Christians are infallible and we just don't know. And instead of fighting about it, let's continue to learn about it. Well, that did not pass. But some congregations have said they're tired of the continuing back and forth about it, that it's very clear that the church does not have all of God's revelation yet, and don't want this to be the conversation that dominates the mission and ministry of the church. So some other churches have decided to pull out as well. That is my presentation. I am delighted to answer any questions that you have. Eric?
Got a few questions here that we'll go through. One question is, last week we learned about a female bishop appointed who was openly lesbian. How did that occur given the discipline? Did she have to proclaim celibacy? Were there any repercussions from that decision?
Okay, excellent question. A bishop, any elder in the United Methodist Church who is in good standing, any ordained elder can be elected a bishop. And so she was an elder in good standing in her annual conference. She's in the Western jurisdiction. And in many places in the Western jurisdiction, as I said earlier, when people are candidates for ministry, in some annual conferences, they will be asked, do you agree to be celibate, and do you declare that you are not a self-avowed practicing homosexual? I'm so sorry. Well, she did not have to answer those questions. Some annual conferences don't require those questions. And so as an elder in good standing, she was able to be elected a bishop. Because there was no challenge to her election. She therefore was elected a bishop in good standing.
Carlinda, bless you. We'll give you a moment here to try to get back with us. We've all been there before, and so we understand, and we'll give you a few minutes here to try to get reconnected if possible. While we're waiting on Garlinda, I did want to mention this is something that she brought up in the first session of our series, but she's using the term homosexual and homosexuality. She's using these terms very particularly and intentionally, because those are the terms that have been a part of this debate and that have been in the book of discipline. And so she's being very intentional about matching that language that has been used. However, and she mentioned this, but I want to underscore it, that that is no longer a correct term to use. It implies almost a pathologizing of LGBTQ people, and so that is a very offensive term. But again, Garlinda's using this term very intentionally because that is how this debate has been framed. Are you back with us, Garlinda?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I am so sorry. Were you able to hear my answer about the bishop? That she was an elder in good standing and therefore was eligible to be elected a bishop. Let me also say, Eric, based on what you said, the reason I use the word homosexual so specifically is because the book of discipline does not address people who are bisexual, who are transgender, who are queer, intersex. Currently, the conversation is only about people who are gay and lesbian. And that has been a conversation in our church as well. So, the church hasn't caught up with the times, kind of. Other questions?
One of the things that I wanted to see if you could elaborate on is the grace through separation protocol. Of course, this protocol has been a lot of the stakeholders involved in this conversation over the last few years are tired of being tired, and they're tired of this debate. So everyone has sort of agreed to figure out a way forward, and they came together around the table and agreed upon a couple of years ago this grace through separation protocol. And so it seems like there's support around this protocol. However, a lot can change because General Conference has been delayed so many times. But I was wondering if you could sort of tell us a little bit about some of the highlights of that protocol that we're hoping will be considered and seems to have traction among the different groups.
Yeah, so this was an ad hoc group of people who said, as Eric said, look, we're not going to get anywhere. So we need to allow people to leave if they want to leave. And part of what's keeping people from leaving is, at congregations particularly, is fear of what's going to happen to their property. Are they going to lose their church building? So the protocol was developed. I am so sorry. The protocol was developed to further define how congregations and groups could leave the church with their property and also money to transition to join a new church or become independent if they want to. There is an amount of money that is being discussed for example, the Global Methodist Church, if it becomes the Global Methodist Church, to receive a certain amount of money to get started. And I think there's an appetite for that. Now, I will just be honest. There are some people who feel that this protocol is too generous to folks who and these are not my words, but who have just spent decades dividing the church, because some of the conversation in the Wesley Covenant Association, some of the players of the Wesley Covenant Association are not just concerned about how the church deals with people who are gay and lesbian. There are other issues of concern. These are people who have been concerned about our mission sending agencies, feeling like our mission agencies have been too much in the hands of people of color and of women. And so there have been other sorts of political debates. So there are some who feel that this protocol of reconciliating grace may be bending over too far to accommodate people who have seen themselves as being divisive in the church. Then there are others who say, look, some of these churches have been foundational in their mission work, and we need to let them go with grace. We need to honor the ministry, honor what they have actually done in and through the United Methodist churches in terms of donating money. I mean, all of us give money, but money and mission and leaders in the church, many of the churches many of the churches involved in the Wesley Covenant Association have contributed leadership to the denomination, financial resources, missionaries, and that we should honor that and give them a gracious exit. And so the protocol is a proposal that would allow people who wanted to leave because of conscience to leave and take their assets with them without being punitive or penalizing them financially because of it.
Thank you for that answer. And, you know, one of the interesting things that we read about with this protocol is that why it seems to be getting traction is that they brought together stakeholders from the opposite ends of the spectrum, the most conservative and the most progressive, and everyone in between. But yet again, I am hesitant to say, just because so much has happened since this was first put together, if it will stick. Another question submitted that I wanted to ask for your input on. Maybe there's a clear answer on this. Why must attendance for the 2022 General Conference take place in person? The pandemic made meeting remotely routine.
That's an interesting question, and that has been a discussion that has baffled bishops and delegates around the world. Part of the concern is we often think in a U.S. context. Yes, it has been easy for us to meet. I've met with people in Paris. I've met with people, and I'm talking about Paris, France, and in Paris, Tennessee, remotely, and it's been great. But when you get to Zambia, Zimbabwe, when you get to parts of the Philippines outside of Manila, technology and connection are often not as reliable. And remember, we have voting delegates from all over the world, and almost a third of our delegates are on the continent of Africa. And so it is not as easy to have an international meeting with 900 voting delegates remotely. I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to have a Wesley Foundation meeting, and there are only like 12 of us, to have subcommittees to meet and things like that. We're talking about, almost 1,000 people that have to meet in committees and subcommittees and have to have reliable internet throughout. And so the first thing is having the same or similar, having similar technology all around. The other thing is that a meeting online would privilege U.S. delegates because most of the technology that we use, the support systems that support General Conference, are based in the United States. And so it privileges U.S. delegates to the detriment of delegates outside the United States.
And can you imagine having a 900-member Zoom call and telling all them, you're muted, you're muted.
Yeah, or mute yourself. It's not that it's not possible, and there was a proposal actually to do that, but it got shot down in the interest of equity. And that's part of the beauty of our church and part of the challenge of our church. We are tried to be a global church and tried to be connectional across people's ability and access to technology. And so while you and I may enjoy, speedy internet and access, other people do not. So that was the reason.
Well said, particularly about the connectional piece. I appreciate that. And also just think about the issue of time zone differences.
Yes.
So a lot of moving pieces. Sort of a related question to the international nature of our denomination. Someone has asked, is this as big of an issue outside the U.S. as it is inside the U.S.?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Of course, you don't need me to tell you that. You wouldn't have asked it if it wasn't a good question. In terms of the church, it depends on where you are. It's very important. I can tell you that in parts of Africa, the United Methodist Church and bishops in the United Methodist Church are looked upon very favorably, very highly, and the church sort of sets the tone for the community, but also reflects the community. And so there, in some, for example, in some some conferences in Africa where the church works very ecumenically, and churches work much more ecumenically, meaning different denominations work together on a regular basis more readily in some countries than we often see. We don't get to see a lot of ecumenical work in our everyday life, but it becomes, it's a challenge when a community of people who are people of faith are, how can I say this, whose tradition has been anti-homosexual, for the United Methodist Church bishop or church to say, well, our church is different, that our church affirms LGBTQ people. Remember, there are some parts of Africa where it is illegal to be gay or lesbian. And in some countries, it is physically dangerous. People are killed because they are gay or lesbian. So yes, it is a big deal in one sense. It's what the United Methodist Church as a whole does, has a strong impact on the clergy and the bishops and the lay people and the congregations who are at work in those contexts. On the other hand, because in most parts of Africa, not all, but in most parts of Africa, there are some prohibitions, or at least cultural prohibitions against homosexuality, that there's just an assumption that homosexuality is quote unquote wrong. Would you call it a big deal? They don't think about it because they think, well, I thought we'd already decided that culturally. I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I think, I can make an analogy that we were that way in the Deep South about people of color. It was like, well, segregation, it's always been a part of our thing. It's not a bad thing. Well, it's not a bad thing until you start to challenge that. And so the answer to your question is yes, and it depends on the cultural context. I will say that there are parts of Africa, South Africa being one, where that are open to same gender marriage, that have offer freedoms and rights full rights to people who are gay and lesbian. So it's not fair to paint all of Africa with the same brush and say the Africans do not. And one of the things that we have heard in our churches, people come over and say, well, Africans do or Africans don't. Well, you can't get one person to speak for all Africans or all women or all older people. And so it's just important to remember that there are exceptions, even on the continent of Africa.
Just a couple of quick questions before we close. So one is about additional information on the presentation today. One thing that I wanted to mention quickly, and I think that I'm telling you the exact website right. I'm not sure if it's .com or .org, so you might Google it. But gracethroughseparation.com or .org. But that website lays out all of the protocol that we've talked about. There is a lot of information. You can even read the protocol. It's like this. So it has highlights. So that is, I think, a really helpful place. Are there other resources that immediately come to your mind for folks to check out about the presentation today?
I follow United Methodist News Service because I used to work there, and that's where Tom and I work together. But I would make sure that you subscribe to United Methodist News Service. You can get their digest. They just had an article the other day about some of the legal wranglings with regard to disaffiliation. It was a very interesting article. It talked about the protocol. It was dated February 8th. It's by Heather Hahn, and I can't remember. Sorry, can't remember the name of the article, but that would be my suggestion.
So we are out of time. Garlinda, thank you so much. You are a trooper. Can we show our appreciation for her? Thank you. BJ?
Just wanted to echo what Eric said. Thank you, Garlinda, for being with us even online and for sticking with us through this. Just wanted to kind of close us out with a word of prayer as we head toward worship. So let's pray together. Gracious God, we have heard about the internal struggle of the United Methodist Church. We've heard about how we compartmentalize and we try to divide. But, oh God, we know that you call us in the scriptures to unity. And so help us to reach across our disagreements. Help us to reach across our understandings so that we don't lose sight of the bigger picture of mission and ministry that we are able to do as a connectional church. We know that we are a rich church because of our connectedness. And so we pray that you will be with us as we find our way forward. Oh God, we pray that as we go to worship, you will be with us. Oh God, we pray all this in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen.